What's up, folks? I'm Chris, your NFL writer here at Occupy Fantasy, here with a look at the giant main slate here for Week 8 of the NFL season. We have 13 games here on DraftKings, 14 over on FanDuel, where we have access to this really exciting Cowboys and 49ers Sunday Night Football game. So as always, I'm going to go through my favorite plays for DraftKings. I'll talk about how to play on FanDuel a little bit differently based off of the games you have access to. And first, we're going to go over my favorite play on the slate, who you see on the screen here, and then we're going to go over some running backs that are in the best position to succeed this week because they are playing for some big favorites, and therefore they are projected to be in some positive game scripts, and there are quite a few of them this week. But Breece Hall leads the pack for me in terms of what my favorite play is going to be, also because the field is going to be all over this play today. He's going to be over 30% owned in tournaments on DraftKings and FanDuel today against the New England Patriots. The Patriots are bottom 5 rush defense in the NFL this season. They're also slightly below average defending running backs in the passing game. And you see here over the last couple of weeks, even though they were trailing game scripts, Hall has seen a dramatic increase in his involvement in the passing game with Aaron Rodgers. So really like getting him into my lineups, especially in low-risk contests. I think it's a mistake to show up this weekend without Breece Hall in your lineups. We have two teams that are mega favorites on this slate. The biggest favorite are the Detroit Lions at home against the Tennessee Titans. That means we should be interested in the duo of Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. Now, we saw Montgomery get a little banged up in last week's game against the Vikings, and Gibbs capitalized on that with over 100 rushing yards, a couple of rushing touchdowns, decent day through the air as well for 35 DraftKings points. I do think we have to lean with the salary and the fact that he's the healthier of the two now and assume that he will get more of the work here based off of his performance. A little bit of a hot hand approach potentially here from Dan Campbell, but we can't ignore David Montgomery's tournament upside either at just $6,400 here on DraftKings. He's still going to see 10 plus rushes and still is very involved near the goal line, so it just as easily could go back David Montgomery's way here on Sunday. Carries no injury designation into this game, so should be good to go. Just feels like the vibes are all over Gibbs at this point. Neither of these guys projects to be super popular this week because of the fact that it is a RB1A, 1B situation. So they're both good tournament plays with Detroit being the biggest favorite and having the highest implied team total in week number 8. Right behind them, we have the Denver Broncos facing the Carolina Panthers in the late window this week. And this is where all the popular plays are on this slate. Javonte Williams, $6,000 on both DraftKings and FanDuel. Still leads this backfield in opportunities. We saw 14 carries, 3 targets last week in a blowout win over the New Orleans Saints. Expecting more of the same here in week number 8. Carolina is the worst rush defense in the league, and the Broncos have a top 10 run blocking offensive line by adjusted line yards. The Panthers are also well below average defending running backs in the passing game, and we see 3+ targets in each of the last 5 games here for Javonte. So we know he's going to have his opportunities there from Bo Nix as well. So I do think Javonte is another running back you want to include in your low-risk builds alongside Breece Hall here in week number 8. Baltimore Ravens are favored by 8 points against the Cleveland Browns on the road this week. And Derrick Henry has hit a ceiling in 4 out of his last 5 games. He's got a touchdown in every single game on the season thus far. He's outside of the most popular plays on this slate, probably because of his salary and the values elsewhere, 2 of which I've already discussed. But he becomes a really good tournament play here against a Browns defense that is league average against the rush and actually slightly above league average defending running backs in the passing game. But this is King Henry, the matchup-proof running back that we know he has been for several years. J.K. Dobbins with the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers are huge favorites, favored by 7.5 points at home here against the Saints. Dobbins has had a ton of work with Gus Edwards on injured reserve, and he projects to be one of the most popular running back plays on this slate. He's my 3rd favorite play for low-risk contests as a result. The Saints are the 2nd worst rush defense in the league, and they are in the bottom 25% of the league defending running backs in the passing game as well. So Dobbins has a really good chance to succeed here. Kamani Vidal has really operated purely as a running back that has spelled Dobbins. He has really seen an increase in his usage without Gus Edwards available. Very disappointing performance on Monday Night Football, but we're not expecting that to continue here. We're expecting him to bounce back in a big way against the Saints in week 8. Now, the other running back that isn't playing for like a huge favorite, but that is going to carry some ownership on this slate is Houston's Joe Mixon against the Indianapolis Colts this week. So just be mindful of that as you prepare to play this slate. Mixon has had 29 plus DraftKings points in all 3 of his full games this season. So it's hard to argue with the ownership there on Houston's main running back here. Talk about low-risk lineups. I said these are my 3 favorite running backs, so I'm not trying to get tremendously different than where the field is on ownership. And then I do think at quarterback, we can go with what the field is doing this week, and we can play Bo Nix at $5,600. Bo Nix has 5+ rushing attempts in each of his last 5 games, and he has a decent floor as a result with his rushing production, a couple of rushing touchdowns in that sample, and he is playing the second worst pass defense in the league here with Carolina. Broncos actually have the best pass blocking offensive line this year by adjusted sack rate, so I get it. It's not super exciting to play Bo Nix. He's not like the most flashy quarterback in the league, but at a modest price of $5,600 in a pristine matchup, he makes a ton of sense for your low-risk builds on DraftKings and FanDuel this week. So not really looking to differentiate here in low risk. I think we can just beat the field here with Bo Nix. Now, at pass catcher, things are kind of interesting this week. We have the return of Tua Tagovailoa under center for the Miami Dolphins. He has seen several specialists, and they have completely cleared him to return to action, so that's all we're going to really talk about here. We're going to leave that other narrative aside. Tua absolutely makes this offense go, makes it way better. And you only have to look at the last few weeks of action to understand just how important he is to this offense. This is a huge lift for Tyreek. This is a huge lift for Jalen Waddle. This is a huge lift for Devin Achane, Raheem Mostert, and Jonnu Smith at tight end. So all of those guys are in play. And they're all actually underpriced because they've been priced for this Tyler Huntley, Tim Boyle version of this Dolphins offense that has been extremely underwhelming this week. Tua himself, just $6,100. I think he will be second most popular play in low-risk contest behind Bo Nix. At wide receiver, Tyreek Hill, just $7,000. This is well below his ceiling for pricing. He opened the year at $8,700 on DraftKings. I know we've seen him push over $9K when this offense is operating on all cylinders. So I think this is a good spot for Tyreek Hill. Unfortunately, the field also thinks it's a great spot for Tyreek Hill. He's actually projecting right now to be our most popular wide receiver in the Occupy model, which puts him firmly in consideration in low-risk contests. He did catch a questionable tag because of a foot injury, though, so we have to keep an eye on that. His teammate, Jalen Waddle, at $5,400, also going to be very popular here against the Arizona Cardinals for Miami. So definitely in play for low-risk contests as well. Arizona's the 4th worst pass defense in the league, and they are extremely poor defending wide receivers out of slot route positions. They are the 2nd worst in the league defending slot routes. So that is a really, really good sign for this Dolphins offense because all these guys mix into the slot and run some routes out of there. Each of Hill and Waddle run about 30% of their routes out of the slot. And of course, you have Jonnu Smith at tight end who operates largely out of the slot as well. So Tua back under center, really, really, really important for these Dolphins receivers. And that is why they're going to be popular this week in both low risk and high risk contests. The other wide receivers that are going to be extremely popular this week, we have T. Higgins with the Cincinnati Bengals in their matchup this week with the Philadelphia Eagles. He caught a questionable tag as well because I guess he injured his quad in Friday's practice, so that is definitely important to watch. A late week injury is never a good thing, but if he's able to go, we have seen T. Higgins have nearly a 30% target share in this offense since he rejoined the starting lineup in week number 3. So he got a tremendous floor, tremendous ceiling. We've seen 12+ DraftKings points in each of the last 4 games, 6+ targets in every game that he has played this year, and that has we saw the ceiling against the Ravens and the Panthers as well. So that's a big reason why Higgins is going to be a little bit more popular than the more expensive Jamar Chase. Higgins has actually seen far more opportunities to catch the football over the last few weeks since he has returned to the lineup for Cincinnati. We got Ladd McConkey. The theme of this this week is that a lot of your projected popular wide receivers all have injury statuses. McConkey is questionable with a hip injury, but he was able to play through it last week, still led this team in routes and in opportunities. We see 6+ targets each of the last 4 games. We should see another strong performance from McConkey here against the Saints from Justin Herbert with Quentin Johnson out once again. It should be a really, really big day for McConkey through the air at just $5,100 here on DraftKings. And then kind of dancing around it, there's plenty of values on this slate. Tampa Bay with the season-ending injury for Chris Godwin last Monday. Mike Evans with a hamstring injury that's going to hold him out for a month. You have 3 plays here that are all extremely cheap on both sites this week. Our favorite is Jalen McMillan. He actually projects to be the most popular. This is their draft pick from this spring's past NFL draft, so I think he has the highest pedigree of the three receivers we expect to play the most for Tampa this week. 8 targets last week as well. Definitely feel like he's probably bordering on entering underperforming wide receiver territory if this continues and we don't get the fantasy production. But we're actually banking on getting the fantasy production here from McMillan. The other Tampa Bay receivers that are going to play a lot, Trey Palmer led this group of who's remaining in routes run last week. So he should be another popular option this week. And then Sterling Shepard will probably take over in the slot for Chris Godwin. He is also going to play quite a bit now. All three of these guys, you can pick any of your favorite values here. Ours, Jalen McMillan for low-risk lineups. Over with Cleveland. Cleveland saw some changes as well. Deshaun Watson, Achilles injury, out for the season. Jameis Winston is going to start this week. And based off of how Watson had been performing, this is probably a lift to the pass catchers here. David Njoku, going to be one of your most popular tight end plays on this slate. Huge 14-target effort last week against Cincinnati from all the Cleveland quarterbacks that played. So probably has the safest floor as a result, and saw his DraftKings salary come way up to $5,100 from $4,100 last week because of that. So he's probably a great low-risk play. But at wide receiver, Jerry Jeudy did still lead this team in routes run last week with a very underwhelming 2.8 fantasy points. So I would still keep an eye on him for high-risk contests. But in low-risk contests, the field is going to be most interested, I think, in Cedric Tillman here at $3,300. You saw 12 targets last week against the Bengals, near the minimum price. He's the cheapest value of all the values that I've discussed here for low-risk contests. So I would actually consider him. Also, you don't really need to play more than one of these values, though, because there's plenty of spots to differentiate. Let's get back to some of the good players. So the other receivers that are going to be really highly owned this week, Drake London with the Falcons on the other side of that Tampa Bay game. We have Stephon Diggs with the Houston Texans. He's going to be very popular. And then finally, popular every week because he always scores touchdowns on like 4 touches or less, Jaden Reed with the Green Bay Packers, with Green Bay having the second highest implied team total on this slate. I think he makes a ton of sense to include at $6,700 to get exposure to that offense. Now at tight end, obviously talked about Njoku with the Cleveland Brown values. Going back to the Tampa Bay values, your most popular tight end this week, it's going to be Cade Otton at just $3,500. He has led this team in routes run over the last year plus. We've seen 6+ targets in each of the last 5 games. A really big game last week, 10 targets, 8 receptions, 100 yards, with that very pass-heavy come from behind trailing script for Tampa Bay last week with the injuries at wide receiver. Otton actually a very, very strong play this week. That the field is going to be all over. So I think in low risk, you have to do it. In high risk, he's going to be like 20-30% owned this week, and therefore I think that gives you an opportunity to differentiate. Atlanta has actually been one of the best defenses in the league in terms of defending tight ends, at least as far as fantasy production is concerned. They're a top 6 defense defending tight ends in fantasy, so I would actually consider going elsewhere. But in low risk, Cade Otton here. We've got $5,150 per player remaining. Come back to our final wide receiver. Talk about defense. The Chicago Bears are our number 1 defense in the Occupy model this week. We are anticipating that Jaden Daniels is going to miss the start for the Commanders this week and that Marcus Mariota will be under center. Unfortunately, the field is all over this as well. The Bears project to be the most popular defense that you can play this week. We have the Ravens that are also going to be very popular as a huge favorite against a backup quarterback in low-risk contests this week. I think my favorite high-risk defenses are going to be basically literally anyone else. They don't rank very high in our model, but I've been eyeing the Chargers here against Spencer Rattler, who looked really, really bad in his last outing. Chargers, big favorite this week, and they had a good defensive performance last week despite the loss against Kyler Murray. So I think that they're a fine play at defense that's a little different. But the other places I think you can go, near the top of the salary table, of course, the Chiefs against the Raiders are a big favorite. The Broncos against Carolina, they're a big favorite. The Lions, huge favorite, biggest favorite on the slate against the Titans. The salary is there this week with the value to just kind of play one of these good defenses here. But our model also likes the cheap Falcons against the Bucs. Maybe the Bucs offense actually struggles to move the ball this week without Evans and Godwin. Falcons look like another defense that might be a decent option that'll be less popular than some of the other plays that I just talked about. But I'll stick with the Bears for the sake of the argument. We have $7,600 for a final wide receiver in low-risk contests. And that's probably your Diggs London spot here, or Tyreek Hill. Probably going to see one of these guys get in there at minimum, and maybe you have some salary to play around with to come up at tight end or defense or something like that. But this is effectively what the field is going to be doing in low-risk contests. Same idea here over on FanDuel, where Bo Nix is going to be real popular. Otten's going to be real popular at tight end at just 5,200. Let's get the McMillan value. You see he's just 4,900 here. Want exposure to that Green Bay offense, 6,800 per player remaining. We throw Bears defense in here. They're a little bit more expensive, and wide receiver, you can literally play anybody that's available at wide receiver to finish off your low-risk lineup here on FanDuel by attacking the slate this way. High-risk contests. With all of the big favorites on this slate, the theme of this week to me is we don't necessarily have to force the bringbacks, because when games are blowouts, we don't necessarily see enough fantasy production from the underdog side of the game, if that does hold up. And we have so many big favorites that we can actually just mix and match pieces from these heavily favored offenses instead. So like, for example, Jared Goff is very highly ranked in our model this week with the Detroit Lions carrying the highest team total here. You could play Goff and Brown, and I wouldn't force a Tennessee bringback here at a 12.5 point spread. It just does not seem very necessary. On the Denver side, I mean, this is certainly going to be the chalkiest play on this slate since it's what everybody is doing in low-risk contests. But using a Denver pass catcher like Troy Franklin, who had a big game in terms of opportunity last week with Bo Nix under center, he's not necessarily going to be very popular, so you could play him. You go back to Sutton, who does lead this team in reps but didn't have an opportunity last week. He won't be very popular. So I guess you do have an opportunity to differentiate with Denver if you don't play Nix and Javonte in the same lineup. The Chiefs, we have Patrick Mahomes, and we have a spot here where the Raiders are actually the third worst defense in the league defending tight ends in fantasy thus far. So Travis Kelce has been leading this offense in opportunities since all the injuries to wide receiver over the last month or so, and I do think he is in line to see another big day here against the Raiders. So I like a 2-0 here with Mahomes, but you also have access to Xavier Worthy, who had over 120 air yards last week on his 8 targets. I would argue he's probably pretty close to an underperforming wide receiver over the last couple of weeks if that usage holds up. And we have the newly acquired DeAndre Hopkins, who is just $4,900 here on DraftKings, extremely affordable over on FanDuel as well. Not clear how much he's going to play, but he is not on the injury report, so I assume he will be active. We can play the Chiefs without using a bringback, given how heavily favored they are this week. We do have the Baltimore Ravens. And what makes Baltimore a little more interesting on this slate is the questionable tag for Zay Flowers, because we can get a really cheap Rashad Bateman who has an extremely high average depth of target. That's why he's able to put up these crooked numbers on low volume. That's an interesting 2-0. Of course, we've seen Jackson and Henry hit their ceiling together. This is expensive, but again, we have so many values this week, we can play literally whatever we want. So I think we want to focus on playing some of these actually good offenses in our tournament lineups this week. The Chargers favored by 7.5 points, so you could go to Justin Herbert, you could go to a popular Ladd McConkey. That's in play, and the Jets. A little bit of leverage, I think, off of Breece Hall, although you could certainly play this with Breece Hall as well. You could go Rodgers, you could go with Garrett Wilson or Devontae, and that's not necessarily something the field is doing at a high clip this week anyway. I think leveraging value and playing something that has a chance to be a little different this week. I love double stacking Baker Mayfield because all of his pass catchers are super cheap this week. So we could go with this Mayfield cheap wide receiver tight end stack. We could run it back with Bijan or Drake London. I'm going to go with Drake London here. And we can play all those popular running backs that I talked about. We can play J.K. Dobbins. We can play Breece Hall. We can play Javonte. See, we have 43.50 per player remaining. We have that very popular Bears defense. Leaves us with 6,000 for a wide receiver. And I think I talked about plenty of guys that you can fit in here to make this work. So that's a little bit of how I'm looking at the Week 8 slate here on DraftKings. Same idea over on FanDuel. I love the Tampa Bay stack. It's basically just tacking Mayfield onto popular cheap pass catchers with McMillan and Otten. We can get to Drake London here. Still have 8,300 to play. Final wide receiver, like maybe Jaden Reed. So that's it. That's how I'm looking at week number 8. Big slate, big favorites. Don't necessarily have to use bringbacks. Can use bringbacks, of course, but a lot of ways to play this week. Going to be a lot closer to like the week 1 slate with like 2-0 builds with not a lot of correlation within the lineup. Keep that in mind as you get ready to play your contest this Sunday. Good luck in week number 8. I'll be back next week to talk to you about week number 9.